Well, let's go to our panel in what's been a pretty big week in New South Wales, Budget Week, amongst other things. We're joined by Gareth Ward, as you know, the Families, Communities and Disability Services Minister in the Berejiklian Government, and Chris Minns, who's been the member for Cogra for the Labor Party in the New South Wales Parliament since 2015. Though the madness about what you can or can't do persists, look at this nonsense in South Australia. Unbelievable. And I repeat boringly, we're not open for business no matter what you hear. Currently in Australia, there are no serious or critical cases of coronavirus. There are 23 people in hospital. Politicians are now running the risk, like this fool in South Australia, of making fools of themselves. Thankfully, the Queensland Liberal leader, David Crisafulli, has asked for that piece of paper that no one to date can provide, simply saying to the Queensland Premier, where is the health advice that justifies all this? The answer, I suspect, is there's none. And how do you think business feels when the budget papers tell us that the number of tourist arrivals in New South Wales has effectively fallen to zero? Men, may I welcome you both and just say this. I just want to share with you one desperate hospitality businessman who wrote to me today, and he said, quote, while Gladys states we're open for business, that's not the case. The reality is that come 2021, by the end of March, the wheels could fall off and the hospitality industry will be in an absolute crisis. So much has been directed from offshore companies, which is a huge problem for corporates hosting events locally, and so it goes on. Gareth, you first. Can you explain to me where the 4 square metre rule comes from?
Yeah, Alan, it's based on medical advice, and what I'd simply say to you is that if you come to places like my electorate on the South Coast, I know you've spoken about being open for business. I see all of my local businesses opening back up, and we're seeing a great deal of the tourism trade coming through the South Coast. So I appreciate that this has affected the world over, but there's only one place I'd rather be, and that's Australia at this time.
Oh, Gareth, we don't want
to go through what other countries have gone.
Oh, Gareth, come off it. You're on autopilot. Gareth, why at a school function the average age of deaths in Australia is 83, a 4 square metre rule, alcohol's permitted, but you must be seated. Can you give me this piece of paper that says that at a school function they must be seated? Where does this come from? I want to know.
I think if I gave it to you, I don't think you'd believe me or agree with it.
Well, yeah, you've been invited every week to give it to me, and you haven't produced it.
Alan, look, I have to totally reject what you're saying in relation to the quality of the medical advice. I mean, you only need to look at other countries that have had devastating second waves, have seen shutdowns of
Gareth,
businesses.
can I just tell you, these countries where there are devastating second waves, the death rate is 0.065%. And if you want to check the World Health Organization statistics today, which I check every day, 99.2% of all cases are mild. Chris, can I just come to you? I mean, why is this limit 300 for a venue, a corporate venue, alcohol permitted while seated? I don't know, where does this 300 come from?
Well, I guess it's an attempt by health authorities to, if there is a COVID outbreak, to prevent the spread of it in enclosed spaces. But look, as I said on your program last week, I do believe that we need a COVID roadmap now. If there's continuous days of zero infections, the government does have a plan. They know exactly when we'll have a full opening up of the economy, and serious restrictions on people's personal liberties will be lifted. And I think they should tell us all what that plan is.
Well, let me just ask Gareth one thing. One thing we get off this. Gareth, you can have 150 at a wedding, but something must happen on December 1, which I don't know about, because suddenly on December 1 you can have 300. Why is that?
Well, that's because we believe we're on a pathway back to a more secure future. I mean, look, Labor can't have it both ways, Alan. On one hand, you've got the opposition leader saying we need to shut the borders to South Australia. The next minute she's saying we need to open up the borders everywhere else. I mean, there's just been no consistency there. Gladys Berejiklian has been consistent. Every time I see her speaking, Alan, it's about releasing the controls, the restrictions on the people of our state, as opposed to other state leaders that are seemingly imposing more.
I don't understand, Gareth. I mean, can you explain to me what Gladys means when she said on Monday, quote, we need to live with COVID. Every time there's an outbreak, you can't shut down borders, disrupt lives or disrupt businesses. That's the exact opposite of what is happening. But anyway, look, let's go to another Chris Minns. I'm just wondering what either of you know about this property tax. This is dangerous stuff, this, because what I think Dominic Perrottet, by the way, is doing a terrific job, and I think he's the hope of the side. But not for the first time, he says that he's going to overhaul the way Australians are taxed on property, and he wants to replace stamp duty with a land tax. Gareth, I'm not having a shot at you here. I'm not too sure anyone in the Parliament could speak for 5 minutes on land tax strengths and weaknesses.
Well, if you give me the time, Alan, tonight, I'm happy to bore you senseless with a dissertation, but I won't. Look, you've got to make sure that you don't confuse the difference between stamp duty and land tax. And look, back years ago when my parents were growing up, it wasn't unusual for people just to have one job, and you mightn't move too many times in your life. But for a lot of younger people, the stamp duty is a huge impost on buying your first home. What the Treasurer has rightly said is, look, tax reform is really tough. We know John Howard knew that. But what Gareth, he's saying is... How
many properties in New South Wales pay no land tax?
There'd probably be everyone who owns their own home, Alan. You don't pay land tax.
How many properties pay tax?
There's a difference between land tax and stamp duty. We've got to be clear.
How many properties pay no land tax? Because I'm saying if you're going to start introducing a land tax, you're going to tax the 2 million properties that currently pay nothing.
Alan, with respect, I think you're confusing stamp duty and land tax.
No, I'm not confusing anything. I'm not confusing anything. I'm not confusing anything. There are 2 million properties in New South Wales that pay no land tax. There are 300,000 properties that pay $3 billion in land tax. Who is going to tell the owners of the 2 million properties that you're about to tax them? Chris, we've got to go, but a final comment from you.
No, you're absolutely right. They're getting rid of the zero exemption on investor properties. It means millions of people will pay land tax for the first time, maybe up to $3,000 a year. Lots of questions about this policy because it's going to hit people very, very hard.
Rubbish.
Dynamite.
Rubbish.
It is.
That was the...
Gareth says it's rubbish. We've got to go, but I do think it's so important that I guarantee you can both do some homework and we'll come back next week and actually talk exclusively on this issue.
I'd love the opportunity to explain it out.
Okay. You know, I don't need explanation, Gareth. I'm not a dumbbell. I know exactly what it's about. I have written papers on land tax, and this is political and electoral dynamite if it's badly handled. But thank you both, and we'll talk next week, property tax. We'll see you then.